Hello everyone, the Hearth Guy once again, and today I feel like being appreciative, specifically towards those that don't get enough appreciation. Parents, teachers, veterans, giant armored men that spend their days turning my bones into a fine powder, laughing at me all the while. You know, the important people. Bosses are cornerstone to many video game experiences, setting themselves up as impressive obstacles to be overcome. Whether they live up to that is a different story, but sometimes a boss will do all the right things and still not get the recognition it deserves. And I think that's a shame. There are plenty of well-thought-out bosses that are just not appreciated enough, and I intend to give them some of the attention they deserve. A small caveat: I won't be talking about overly hated bosses here, just ones that don't get what I feel is the right amount of attention for the games that they're in, either because the game they come from is full of great bosses and one slips between the cracks, or, in a sea of mediocrity, one gets unfairly labeled alongside all the rest. Insert general disclaimer about subjectivity of personal opinion here. Let's move on to the top 5 underrated bosses. With Mega Man's impressive collection of robotic rascals, there are plenty of highlights. Fireman, Pharaoh Man, Centaur Man. What, is that one only me? Unsurprising that with such a large pool of bosses to pick from, there would be plenty of rather good bosses that just sort of sink beneath the cracks, ignored and often forgotten until you start up the game and go, wait, Dustman? Dustman is one of the robot masters found in Mega Man 4, which is already rough since it's home to such memorable examples as Skull and Pharaoh Man. However, Dustman has his own qualities that I think are too often slept on. To start with, his level is actually pretty clever in design, forcing the player to slow down unless they want to run face first into hazards that would no doubt kill them outright. The garbage press part, for instance, was a creative use of Mega Man's mechanics to create a hazard that could threaten to actually stall you by a decent amount, but the level is just a build-up to the boss. Dustman's main gimmick is his his vacuum ability. He spends a few seconds invincible trying to drag you towards him for some easy collision damage. Afterwards, he'll either try to close the gap or just go straight to firing his garbage cubes at you, which will explode into shrapnel. This attack is deceptively hard to dodge unless you're a scrub like me and want to try to calculate the exact trajectory of every pixel with the rewind function. Alternatively, you can just slide under the attack and you can usually dodge it pretty well. Dustman can also be damaged during this supposed invincibility phase with several options, such as Toadman's Rain Attack or Ringman's Ring Boomerang, the latter of which is his weakness. In the grand scheme of things, Dustman isn't complex, but most robot masters in his day and age aren't. But there are several little things that, at least to me, make Dustman a more enjoyable experience than people give him credit for. Oh well, even if no one else cares, I still like him, no matter how much he sucks. I am a comedic genius. Like, comment, and subscribe. This may just be me, but boss fights are not really the thing I think of when I think of Mass Effect. I can think of plenty of things, but not boss fights, which is weird because the franchise actually has quite a few. For this list, we'll be looking at the Overlord DLC for Mass Effect 2. Under orders from the paramilitary organization Cerberus, we head to a research facility on a far-off world where we are immediately made aware of something strange. The overabundance of fresh meat is telling me that something is very wrong here, and why is that window giving me the stank eye? So yeah. As we learn later, a rogue virtual intelligence created by Cerberus has gone haywire and has hacked the systems in the facility in an attempt to not only kill us all, but to hitch a ride on our ship and out into the rest of the galaxy. But not all is as it seems. At first, Gavin Archer, the sole survivor, tells us that it's a simple VI that they were experimenting with. Then he tells us that it's actually a VI interfaced with his own brother David, and the strain has caused him to go berserk. Little by little, you uncover the mystery that, well, let's just say that David wasn't entirely willing to have his head attached to a giant computer and used to control robots, and that Archer wasn't wholly honest about how can I say this? The mental state of his brother.
Quiet. Please, make it stop.
Yeah. Yikes. David Archer, the brother of Gavin Archer, has had his savant mind probed and forcibly interlaced with the VI core in order to control the mechanical race known as the Geth. his unique thought patterns allowing him to do what no man or machine could do alone, and as we would know by now, Cerberus isn't above some crimes against humanity. In order to save David, we have to pacify his rage, which involves a short but sweet puzzle fight between you and the VI core holding him. As Geth spawn in to attack you, you have to periodically shoot at an increasing number of nodes to prevent David from uploading his consciousness to your ship. While the Geth can begin to outnumber and outgun you if you don't remember to take a few down, it's also important to keep your attention on the core. The window to attack after you destroy some of the nodes is short, and every time you have to destroy more to be able to do any damage. The longer you take, the more Geth spawn in. The more Geth spawn in, the more complicated this whole mess becomes. That's why your best strategy is to try to end the fight quickly. Shotguns are a great weapon of choice since the boss arena is already small and encourages moving around, though you can shoot the nodes and be ready to deal damage to the core as well. If you're quick enough, you could even end the fight earlier than normal. Boss fights are already not really talked about in Mass Effect, and among those that are, this one is almost always left untouched. Which is surprising since it's an example of a good unconventional boss fight in what is otherwise a franchise full of straightforward shootouts. Doubly so when the story around David is so heart-wrenching and the chance to save the poor man from the influence of his brother and Cerberus tops off this normally forgettable DLC and makes it worth remembering and replaying. It was supposed to be harmless.
Square root of 912.04 is 30.2. It all seemed harmless.
One of Elden Ring's weaknesses, in my humble and objectively correct opinion, is its bloated number of quote-unquote bosses. Besides quickly making every repeated boss feel like the creators spammed the copy-paste key and call it a day, you really begin to miss the more dynamic and interesting bosses when they're separated by so many mediocre ones. Don't get me wrong, Elden Ring's combat is still excellent, but it really doesn't get to shine in situations like this. Thankfully, we're given more than a few chances to really experience this game at its best, and one of those chances comes around the mid-game when arriving in Altus Plateau. You could run directly to the giant glowy tree, venture along Volcano Manor, or any other number of painful activities that will likely result in you respawning at the nearest site of grace. However, moving to the northern end of the map will take you to the Sunken Castle. In classic Miyazaki fashion, it's a poison swamp, though with its own twist. There are two levels to the area, the upper ramparts and the lower swamps. You have to pass through both, and there are plenty of poison mudmen, rot knights, and revenants in your way, but persevere through all of that and you will arrive at the doorstep of one of the most creative bosses in Elden Ring. Every so often, you might get ambushed at night by a random boss called the Bell-Bearing Hunter. Well, if you had any lingering resentment about how thoroughly he no doubt stomped you into oblivion, here's your chance for some payback. Elimir has one of the best boss designs in Elden Ring. The metal thorns protruding from his armor and the way it looks almost patched together really sells the story behind him. Elimir is a known murderer and hunter of merchants and instructors throughout the lands between. After going on said killing spree, he was finally captured by House Mirai and sentenced to death. However, as the executioner's sword was about to fall, he used the telekinetic skills he learned from his homeland of Aeokid to snatch the sword away from his executioner's hands and fight back. During his rampage, the head of House Mirai was kicked out and left all his creepy Malenia collectibles. Now, as the shaded castle begins to sink further into the poison swamp of House Mirai's creation, Elimir waits here, staring at a portrait of Malenia and apparently continuing his hunts for merchants throughout the lands between. Elimir's fighting style is entirely unique from any other boss save for, well, himself. He is very aggressive and will often fake you out with his telekinetic sword, so the key to this fight is to stick close to him and prevent him from using it. This is a tricky thing to pull off with such an aggressive boss, and he has many ways to force you away from him. However, just about any distance from him will allow him to start controlling the flow of the fight, which, considering that his range with that sword is somewhere between 2 feet and wherever he wants, I'd say you don't want him controlling the fight. Even still, many of Elimir's attacks are hard to get a good grasp on. His corkscrew has a deceptively long attack period, his shield attack can knock you away and set you up to be wombo-comboed out of existence, and don't you dare get caught by that grab attack. Elimir is such an interesting boss fight, but due to its obscure location, it's entirely possible to miss out on both the area and the boss. It's just that in a game made up of gems like Radahn and Margit, the good gets overshadowed by the great, but that doesn't lessen the quality of those good bosses. So here's to the literal edgiest boss in all of Elden Ring. Metal Gear Rising isn't really a low-key kind of game, and that translates to its bosses. There are always these massive spectacles that demand your attention. Look around and you're liable to find staunch defenders of just about every one of the Winds of Destruction saying that their chosen boss fight is actually the best thing ever made. However, one of the Winds is sadly left out of sight and out of mind, by even the game itself. Believe it or not, despite his name, Jetstream Sam isn't technically one of the 4 Winds of Destruction. He's affiliated, sure, but he's more of a recent addition to the bad guys. You see, the 4th Wind of Destruction isn't ever seen in the main game, and you'd never know he existed without the Blade Wolf DLC. Get your stars and stripes ready and prepare to fire your loudest fireworks for my favorite freedom lover, Khamsin. Khamsin is a deceptively complicated character despite the over-the-top Murica persona. Through the lyrics of his song and some context clues, we can put together his story. A former Marine deployed during the Gulf War, his loyalty and skills contributed to the success of the war. However, his personal inflexibility ultimately led to him being discharged from the military. With his love of country and desire to spread freedom unabated, he joined Desperado and had himself turned into a cyborg. Somewhat non-standard compared to most cyborgs, rather than integrating technology throughout his body, he instead basically attached himself to a giant mech with a chainsaw axe. Honestly, I approve. He then took the name Khamsin, a reference to the hot desert winds of the Middle East, or more accurately, a desert storm. Much like how the Blade Wolf DLC tackles the idea of fighting for freedom, Khamsin represents forcing the ideals of freedom onto others, especially through those who don't even know what they're fighting for. So, as Blade Wolf attempts to flee to safety, he naturally comes face to face with Khamsin for the only unique DLC boss fight to come out of Revengeance. Khamsin attacks with a lot of heavy smashing attacks that can be difficult to dodge or parry, but Blade Wolf's unique mobility and Khamsin's generally smaller health bar means that the boss fight would go pretty quick if it weren't for the added integration of stealth in the middle of the fight. After a certain point, Khamsin will smash the ground for a heavy attack. Avoiding this, you can then use the more stealth-oriented Blade Wolf to sneak around behind him to deliver a massive amount of damage. Do this a couple times and you'll be sent into one of Revengeance's classic quick-time finishers, with the Hot Wind Blowing's lyrics erupting for a final hurrah. A shame we don't get more of them, because personally it's my favorite track from the entire game. A message about how the common soldier is treated as a disposable, ignorant pawn in someone else's game. Fitting for both Khamsin and Blade Wolf. And though the DLC ends poorly for both Khamsin and Blade Wolf, their showdown nevertheless deserves to be remembered for the kind of effort that can be put into a DLC boss. Leon Telethia, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. What? A Xenoblade entry doesn't make the list? It's more likely than you'd think. Seriously though, an exceptional introduction to the gameplay of both Melia and Riki, as well as a chance to further hone your new Purge ability. Soul Warrior, Hollow Knight. Yeah, believe it or not, this is a boss. Half the reason it's underrated is because the game doesn't really present it as a boss. Oh well, Godhome gave it some love. Dragon Age is a long and, well, let's be honest, tumultuous history. The first game is almost universally praised. Inquisition was massive, if perhaps overly ambitious, with a bit too much EA for my liking. And Dragon Age 2 is, Dragon Age 2. This black sheep of the family has been taking L after L since its release, and it's not hard to see why. With a rushed development, sloppy third act, and hilariously binary decision-making, in all ways but technical, it feels like a step backwards from Origins. That's not to discredit that technical leap, because it was genuinely impressive to see the change between Origins and 2. While I have a soft spot for the original's more tactical gameplay, and I kindly refer to Dragon Age 2 as button mash simulator, that isn't to say it's wholly bad. It has some real gems when it comes to boss fights. The Rock Wraith, the High Dragon, and my choice for this list, the final boss of Dragon Age 2, Meredith. Kinda strange for a final boss with an entire game of build-up to be considered underrated, huh? Well, that's a side effect of the game she belongs to. Dragon Age 2 is a mess, that can't be denied, so even the good can get lumped together with the bad. However, let's wipe away some of the grime and take a look at what I consider to be the best boss fight in the entire game, and maybe the entire franchise. Now hold on. Let me explain. Meredith has been built up from the first couple of hours of DA2. The Knight Commander of Kirkwall's Templars and ruthlessly oppressive towards mages. Everything you hear about her paints the picture of a militaristic, if maybe well-meaning leader who has squeezed the mages of Kirkwall for years. Throughout the game, you see the consequences of both her and what she's fighting. You can't go 5 feet without running into either a Templar that's accusing someone of being a blood mage, or an actual blood mage. The more the game goes on, you start to see what the Templars are talking about, even if you don't like their methods. Heck, even you can be a blood mage and hide it from the Templars. It's a real problem. Then the ending of Act 2 arrives. The Qunari are assaulting the city and you cross paths with Meredith for the first time, who saves you from a Qunari mage. While still imposing, she offers to help you, even if she is standoffish towards Orsino, the head of the city's mages. This one interaction asserts Meredith's position very well. Everything she does out of a genuine desire to protect people, which makes for a compelling antagonist. Act 3 screws that up as usual when Anders, in his infinite galaxy brain wisdom, decides to nuke a church and start a holy war. Witnessing a mage murder the Grand Cleric in a building full of priests, Meredith goes full paranoia mode and invokes the right of annulment, which, by Chantry law, grants her the right to systematically execute every mage in Kirkwall without question. From here on out, you either side with the mages or the Templars, which is kind of an irrelevant decision since you have to fight Orsino and Meredith anyway, because this game's third act is about as solid as the Pillsbury Doughboy. After the Orsino fight and you return to the courtyard, regardless of your side, Meredith will attempt to execute you for your involvement in just about everything that went wrong in the city. Which is kinda true. However, future grizzled war vet Cullen steps in to prevent this, which prompts Meredith to lose it, accusing everyone of being traitors and deciding to cleanse Kirkwall herself.
Red flag!
And she pulls out a sword made of the same red lyrium that drove Varric's brother nuts and caused a tear in the veil.
Is that also a red flag?
Crimson.
What follows is the most anime fight I have ever seen in a Western RPG. Meredith is flying around, releasing red energy, and for her second phase begins to bring statues in the courtyard to life in order to weaken you. During this fight, all your companions, Cullen, and a few characters you've helped will show up to help you. This turns what would normally be a basic Dragon Age fight into a full-scale battle between Meredith and, well, the friends you made along the way. As you're cutting your way through her goons, Meredith will jump down to join the fray again, delivering a hero speech before continuing the absolutely glorious madness of this final confrontation. I think the strength of this final boss comes from how it balances the use of so many enemies compared to all your allies. It really does feel like it's you and your friends/rivals against a seemingly unstoppable force, with a bit of help. The fight is chaotic, but not messy if that makes sense, and the feeling of elation you get when you see all your companions show up for the final fight is something I wish Origins had done. That's right, Dragon Age 2 did something better than Origins. With this at the end of a notoriously messy game, you're likely to either lump it in with the rest of DA2's problems or be so burnt out by the end that you don't properly appreciate it. But despite all the bad surrounding it, Meredith's final confrontation is an excellently designed boss fight that has all the right elements to be rightly considered one of Dragon Age's best. I've been the Hearth Guy, and this has been a great opportunity to shed light on some unappreciated bosses. After all publicity is good publicity, right? Right? Well, apparently being forgotten is better than some of these bosses get. See you next time around the Hearth, because this next countdown I'll be doing is for some less fortunate bosses.